Hi, I'm Dr. Christy Solomon with Christian Concepts, where we discuss all things from the Bible to help us on this faith journey. Yeah, today we're continuing in our Women in the Bible series, where we are studying in the Book of Ruth, chapter 2. Last session we covered chapter 1, and we met Ruth and Naomi in Moab because of a famine back in Bethlehem. This chapter starts us where Ruth and Naomi return back to Bethlehem. And while we're going forward in our discussion today, there's some aspects that I'm trusting that you will glean. You hear that word because it's going to come up in our lesson today, that you will glean for enrichment for yourself. One, you need to know uh, who are the characters. Sometimes they're just listed as people, but because this is a narrative, a retelling, an account from others to and left in print for us, this is called a narrative. And the narrative in this um, chapter is including at least five characters. One, we read about Naomi. Naomi is the one who is returning back to her homeland. Two, we read about Ruth. Now we realize God is introducing Ruth to us, and why, which is really important to us. Why is she named as the central character of this book? In fact, why did they name this book after Ruth? And I trust that you know there's only two books named for women, and both of them are in the Old Testament. One is Ruth, and the other is Esther. Nevertheless, this is an opportunity for us to see how much God loves us because Ruth's involvement in this Jewish history is major to our history for Christianity. So, chapter 2, Naomi is returning back to Bethlehem because the context or the situation or the circumstances is that God has replenished the land in Bethlehem and there is food growing once again. Naomi hears about it while she is in Moab and she's returning back to her homeland, to her people, to the God she loves and serves, and to the God she introduced Ruth to back in Bethlehem. So the characters are Naomi, Ruth. We meet Mr. Boaz. Yeah, lots of you women talk about you on the Boaz. Well, that's admirable. We're going to learn how the character of Boaz is introduced to us, and men can learn something as well. We learn about the town's people, specifically the town's women, who greet Naomi at the well, and then the workers who are employed by brother Boaz. Those are the characters. Again, the context is Naomi is returning back from Moab to Bethlehem. And now for the settings. The setting is the town of Bethlehem, but specifically the field of Boaz. So that lets you know that Brother Boaz has it going on. He's an owner of a field and he employs people, and this is the contextual background of what's going on. The people are more engaged. They're happy. They're satisfied. They're being fed. They're not in the drought and the sadness that they were when we find Naomi and her family moving to Moab in chapter 1. So, characters, context, the circumstances now for the concepts. Sometimes you refer to them as themes, but there are several concepts that God has allowed these men who are inspired to give us an idea of how life is flowing. And for you to consider something a theme, it needs to be understood that is universally understood around the world, not just in your little city, not just in your state, if you're in America, not just localized, but universal, like love and hatred. All those are universal concepts or things. So in this chapter, chapter 2, we're going to be introduced to the kindness. That's a theme introduced in chapter 2, and it is introduced by Mr. Boaz, as well as the theme of redemption. Because in this chapter, we're going to find that in order for, and I'm telling you already the plot here, but in order for this redemption concept to be revealed to us, we need to know what redemption means. Well, I'm trusting that most of us know the term redemption because it has to do with the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who redeemed us. And the redemption concept is where something is given or paid for in exchange for something else. Yeah, you get what I'm saying? So, redemption is introduced in Ruth because in the Jewish community at that time, when there was a widow, another member of that family could redeem her to a wife status, move her out of being a widow by paying for whatever that inheritance or that um, aspect would entitle. So whatever it costs for the man to include that female or the daughters in exchange for the land or the rights, there had to be something exchanged or redeemed for, which is what we are leading to in the New Testament when Jesus Christ lays down his life sinless for us and he redeems us in exchange for. You get that? This started way back then, and the people in the Jewish community expected some Messiah to make it a better life for them. So we're learning about redemption in Ruth chapter 2. Yes, we also are learning about the providential hand of God. Sometimes you hear your neighbors, your coworkers, and maybe members of your family say terms like "it just so happens," or "luckily this went this way," or "by coincidence." I'm suggesting to you those are terms for people who don't know the redemption power, the power, the omnipotence of God. Because if in fact you know who God is, there is nothing happenstance for anything he does. I get a high five. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, in the beginning of time, the scriptures say over and over, God has been working to give us all of these aspects of life, these experiences. We don't have to know about them. We don't have to know what's going to happen tomorrow, even this afternoon, this evening. But you can believe that God is already in his providence of power. God's permissive will lets us do some things. God's providential will allows even more. And God's providential will is demonstrated in chapter 2 of this book of Ruth because dun, 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 Naomi's daughter-in-law Ruth, who this book is named after, is going to be connected to this Boaz. God has aligned Boaz to meet Boaz, who is a Jewish man, who definitely has it going on, wealth, land, workers, employment, all of that, and a good name, and a man of faith, and a man of integrity, and a man of respect for women. In chapter 2, God has allowed him providentially to meet Miss Ruth, a Moabite who only learned about God because of the because she's a daughter-in-law. Yeah. Do you see all of this happening? Those are concepts that we just couldn't do it ourselves. We don't know enough to make things happen as much as we think I'm gonna make it happen. You may want to make it happen, but I'm just here to say that you just don't have all of that providential power to make anything happen. You hardly know how to fix your breakfast and tie your shoes. You may try to remember some stuff, but I'm telling you, God is in everything we do, everything we desire, and everything that we hope for. So that's another concept. God's providential hand is working this out because, remember, it's supposed to be leading to the cross of Christ where he dies for us, where we now are Christians and we say yes to him, redeeming us, I love this. I love that he introduced it. I even love that it's introduced in this book after Ruth, a female that gives her prominence, a major aspect in this scheme of Christianity, even in the Jewish religion, that no one can dismiss or omit, because through her um, being connected and marrying, and I know I'm telling you ahead of time, to Boaz comes David, King David. And we know that Jesus is in that line as well. Listen, there's so much that's going on in these 4 chapters, and I'm still just in chapter 2. So we have kindness, we have the generosity of Boaz, we have God's providential will and his redemption for us, and in exchange of a human aspect of what he needs to do to get connected to Naomi and this daughter-in-law Ruth, as well as humility. In this chapter, we're going to see the humility of Ruth as she meets this man named Boaz, and she doesn't realize at the time that he's connected to Naomi. Not until she gets back home. Again, I'm trying not to tell you all this goodness of what's going on, but that's what's happening in chapter 2. Those are concepts you need to pay attention to. You need to be understanding what's going on in life and how these concepts are flowing from the hand of God. Chapter 2 also gives you a opportunity to have some discussion later on after your study. And these conversations can lead into you thinking about how God planned for them to meet, and then continue with this line that produces our Savior Jesus Christ. That's a conversation you need to have, because then those who don't know why we are connected to the Jewish religion, the Jewish heritage, this is sharing why we are there. We are not Christians without learning the history of Judaism and what God did with those groups of people. You also might have a conversation with those who you study with, or those in your circle of influence, about the will of God for you. And what he's planned for you, and how you're going to be able to impact. I trust that he's allowing you to influence and even give instruction to, again, your circle of influence. There's lots of threads that can lead into major discussions, major conversations that let us hear, see, feel, and know and trust. Because faith is built up now. Now we realize we're not in this life journey by ourselves. That God can and God does and God has orchestrated several moves that get you to be where you are and allow you to experience the things that you do. Listen, all of these are part of our study in chapter 2, only 23 verses. Yeah, I'm going to give you a clip and allow you to see in a visual form, for those of you who like to see what typically probably happened in this narrative, as the scriptures are read to you, and we're reading from the New International Version. So let's sit back and watch our clip.
Ruth meets Boaz in the grain field. 1. Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side, a man of standing from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. 2. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." 3. So she went out, entered a field, and began to glean behind the harvesters. As it turned out, she was working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech. 4. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvesters. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they answered. 5. Boaz asked the overseer of his harvesters, "Who does that young woman belong to?" 6. The overseer replied, "She is the Moabite who came back from Moab with Naomi." 7. She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the harvesters." She came into the field and has remained here from morning till now, except for a short rest in the shelter. 8. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with the women who work for me." 9. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the women. I have told the men not to lay a hand on you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled. 10. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She asked him, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" 11. Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother and your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." 12. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. 13. May I continue to find favor in your eyes, my Lord, she said. You have put me at ease by speaking kindly to your servant, though I do not have the standing of one of your servants. 14. At mealtime Boaz said to her, "Come over here. Have some bread and dip it in the wine vinegar." When she sat down with the harvesters, he offered her some roasted grain. She ate all she wanted and had some left over. 15. As she got up to glean, Boaz gave orders to his men, "Let her gather among the sheaves and don't reprimand her." 16. Even pull out some stalks for her from the bundles and leave them for her to pick up, and don't rebuke her. 17. So Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Then she threshed the barley she had gathered, and it amounted to about an ephah. 18. She carried it back to town, and her mother-in-law saw how much she had gathered. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. 19. Her mother-in-law asked her, "Where did you glean today? Where did you work? Blessed be the man who took notice of you." Then Ruth told her mother-in-law about the one at whose place she had been working. "The name of the man I worked with today is Boaz," she said. 20. The Lord bless him. Naomi said to her daughter-in-law, "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our guardian redeemers." 21. Then Ruth the Moabite said, "He even said to me, 'Stay with my workers until they finish harvesting all my grain.'" 22. Naomi said to Ruth her daughter-in-law, "It will be good for you, my daughter, to go with the women who work for him, because in someone else's field you might be harmed." 23. So Ruth stayed close to the women of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvests were finished. And she lived with her mother-in-law.
So I'm hoping that as you were listening to the scriptures, reading along with the scriptures, and saw the little clips, that you were able to generate some conversations yourself. We talked about Boaz's generosity before, but I also want you to notice and stir up a conversation about Ruth's commitment and loyalty to her mother-in-law Naomi, because after all, that's who introduced her to the true living God that we serve. Remember, she was a foreigner, but in that household, they still learned about God. They still followed the teachings of God, and that's what kind of conversation that can be generated in your household, whether or not you're the only person. That worships, that serves, that studies, that attends a Christian fellowship. Know that even though you think it's only you, God's great potential for bringing your family under the same understanding is like 100% possible. There's nothing impossible for God. And that's another aspect of conversation you should have, because Boaz demonstrated a proper respect for women. I just must say that again. Brother Boaz demonstrated a proper respect for women. Sister Naomi obviously is a little old to go into the field and glean, yet Brother Boaz thought enough of her to make sure that the men respected her. Come on, Brother Boaz. I'm so loving that God is giving a great description of how men should treat women. And so this is all in chapter 2. This is just another discussion that you might want to have with your family and friends. We can keep talking, but our time is up. We are happy that you have tuned in to study with us again in Women in the Bible. I'm Dr. Christy Solomon. We pray that the peace of God and the fulfilled promises that God has promised you will meet you and your family in your home, and let his love surround you and your family until we study with you again. You be blessed.